Everyone, welcome to Module 2, Week 4. In this week, we're going to be studying hormones and aging. We're going to discuss a few of the related theories, such as the neuroendocrine theory, and how hormones are thought to be associated with the aging process. We're also going to look at some of the examples of some specific hormones and how they affect aging in terms of dysfunction. And then finally, we'll talk about some of the physical changes that are seen with some of these glands and structures related to the neuroendocrine system and target organs and so on. There are a few reference articles for this week that are going to go in a little bit more detail than I will here in terms of specific hormones and specific changes that you may see as examples. But today we're going to spend some time just explaining and describing the theories of the hormone system and the neuroendocrine system and its relation to aging, as well as talk about a few examples, but certainly check out some of the reference articles and other sources as well to really get the specific details for all of the hormones. So basically we will not exhaust all the hormones of the body, but we'll talk about the common ones and then the overall theories that are involved. So the neuroendocrine theory of aging is one that we described in our first week. It actually falls underneath the programmed theories. And so the theory suggests that the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, that hypothalamic and pituitary axis plays a central role in terms of aging. The idea here is that there's a reduced sensitivity of the body's tissues, the target organs, target glands, to some of the hormones and molecules, neurotransmitters, and so on. And so that reduced sensitivity is what essentially alters the various hormone levels and alters the various function of some of the glands and tissues, etc. It also implies that aging is regulated by these glands. And so as these glands lose their function, the ability to regulate aging is lost. And so aging takes place at a more rapid level. It also describes loss of hypothalamic activity, which will then lead to things like a disturbance of homeostasis, altering the levels of hormone concentration. These alterations can be increased in some of those hormone levels. It can be decreased in other hormone levels, depending on what the loss of sensitivity or the dysfunction eventually brings about on a cellular level or on an organ level. And then it can also lead to a reduction of neurotransmitters, signaling molecules as well. And this ties into a loss of sensitivity as well. So some of those signal transduction pathways are less efficient. There's a decrease in some of the signaling molecules like cyclic AMP. Those are blunted or decreased in their levels and their effectiveness, as well as some of the amplifying enzymes that you may have described in different courses, in other courses, such as adenylate cyclase and so on. So the overall ability of cells to bind neurotransmitters or hormones and to signal other cells and signal other organs is just blunted and less efficient and less sensitive. Some of the consequences of these changes or these this dysfunction of the hypothalamic system is an energy misbalance, and we can certainly see that because of the involvement of the thyroid hormone, for example. So there's a huge energy misbalance. There's an inadaptability in general. So whereas we know that homeostasis is the body's ability to adapt to changing external environments, right? So maintain constant internal environments, even in the face of external changes, this ability is blunted or is decreased as a result of this loss of hypothalamic function. We also see a weakened immune system. We'll talk more about the immune system in the final week of this module, but there's also a blunting of the immune response. There's an inability to defend the body against pathogens and invasion of microbiomes, etc. But the overall loss of the immune system is also related in some ways to the loss of the neuroendocrine function. And then finally, we see a loss of the reproductive function, which is a decrease in the ability to produce viable gametes, whether it be eggs or sperm. In the case of females, we know that there's a blunting in the reproductive function overall. So there's a loss of production of eggs at a certain age, and certainly a loss of quality in terms of the male reproductive ability. Moving on here, so the theory goes on to suggest that there's a connection between some of the common metabolic conditions of old age. When we think about old age, we think about those chronic diseases, the non-communicable diseases, diabetes, hypertension, hyperinsulinemia, hyperlipidemia, or bad cholesterol. And so these general conditions of poor health are associated with a deterioration of the immune system at a core. So the theory believes or implies that we see these general disorders, these general chronic conditions, because of the dysfunction at a hormone level. And we can kind of see that. Diabetes is where either cells become less sensitive to insulin, or we have excess insulin in the blood. And so those two forms of diabetes can be directly related or explained by a dysfunction in the neuroendocrine system or in hormones. So the thought is that general deterioration of wealth is strongly connected to a dysfunction with the neuroendocrine system. Now, the theory is not exclusive. So whereas it is a part of one of the programmed aging theories, and so the general premise of this group of theories is that aging is a programmed, planned event, it also lends credence, so it also helps to explain some of the non-programmed related theories, some of the random events theories as well, such as the wear and tear theory, such as the waste accumulation theory. Some of those theories can be supported by the neuroendocrine theory, although the premise of these theories essentially differs. So it is not exclusive in that way. And then finally here, although this theory hasn't been proven, on this note, theories in general are hard to prove. We can have evidence for or against them, but then it becomes quite controversial to scientifically prove or disprove these theories. And that is why there have been so many theories purported historically in the biogerontological space, because it's really hard to scientifically prove or disprove the theories, but there are certain elements or facets of the theory that can be supported based upon fact or evidence that we can present. So although it hasn't been proven as such, there's a lot of evidence that supports it. And we know from sort of a fundamental perspective of the immune system that general well-being is associated to proper endocrine function. We also know that the endocrine system is sort of a central regulatory system. It controls most other systems, including the reproductive system, the gastrointestinal system. We can think about, our energy, metabolism and energy and the thyroid hormone. So the neuroendocrine system is a really central player in overall well-being. And so we have evidence that would help to support the basis for the neuroendocrine system in terms of aging. So let's delve here into a few examples. So we're going to talk about the cortisol hormone to start. So cortisol has been suggested to change or alter levels with aging. We see that there's a blunting of the negative feedback response. So typically, cortisol levels will therefore decrease the amount of cortisol releasing hormone and ACTH that are being released from the various axes in the brain. So that's going to be the hypothalamus and the pituitary secreting these hormones. And so these hormones are going to be influenced by the level of cortisol in the blood, okay? So because there's less of a sensitivity, it's going to be a higher level of these hormones required in order to suppress the CRH and ACTH from the brain. So because of that, we generally tend to see higher cortisol levels in older individuals. This is going to result in a whole host of effects. We know cortisol is typically involved in the body's stress response, be it physical stress or emotional stress. And so in older individuals, because of these high levels of cortisol, we tend to see lack of sleep, we tend to see a reduced hormone, a reduced memory in women. Now, men typically have a reduced memory when compared to women. So we really want to stress the importance of a reduced memory that we see in women. And then when it comes to osteoporosis, we typically associate osteoporosis as a risk factor with women, but because of the high cortisol levels, we also see it in men as well. And so that helps to bring about increased risk for fractures in both men and women. Men because of the high cortisol levels, and women because of their already high predisposition to osteoporosis. Some of the other hormones that we can kind of touch on here, again, you're going to want to reference some of those articles for a little bit more depth, but just to introduce some of the main hormones that we will be discussing: aldosterone. There tends to be a decrease in levels after the age of 70. This can lead to water imbalance, electrolyte imbalance, which can bring about dizziness, fatigue, fainting, even seizures. Vitamin D, calcitonin, aldosterone, and renin, all of these hormones tend to decrease with age as a part of general kidney dysfunction. We also tend to see an associated osteoporosis and a high risk of fractures. Because of this, we tend to see an increase in parathyroid hormone levels. So because of the decrease in things like vitamin D and calcitonin, we see as a response increased levels of parathyroid hormone to try to correct these low levels. And so that will cause demineralization of the bone, because parathyroid hormone absorbs calcium from the bone to the blood to help correct those calcium disturbances. And then that would result in osteoporosis, which will increase risk for fractures. We see thymus atrophy, which is a part of the natural progression of the thymus. The thymus is no longer functioning beyond early adulthood. And so that is going to be associated with a weakened immune system. We don't have the turnover of immune cells like T lymphocytes, and that can be a decrease in the body's ability to defend itself. We also see some reproductive hormone changes: estrogen, progesterone, and prolactin, which is the anti-pituitary hormone involving the estrogen-progesterone axis. These tend to decrease in their levels as well. And that will bring about a rapid decline in the reproductive capability of women and a more gradual decline in men. We see a decrease in testosterone for men. This is a more steady, more gradual decrease. And so we still see spermatogenesis, but the quality of sperm tends to decrease until the age of 70. But testosterone also brings about other consequences, so loss of muscle mass, loss of testis size, etc. Cortisol is another example here, another important hormone. We talked a little bit about it on the previous slide, but basically because of the decreased sensitivity of the feedback loop, we see high levels of cortisol in the blood, which leads to stress, fatigue, decreased glucose sensitivity, prolonged wound healing, and so on. Lastly here, we see melatonin levels decrease, and that's because of the natural calcification seen with the pineal gland with age. And so because melatonin is our sleep hormone, it helps to regulate the sleep-wake cycle, we see less sleep with the elderly and sleep deprivation as well. This is why we typically associate, the role of the older security guard with being, this is why we typically associate the role of a security guard with being older individuals, particularly older men, because of the decline in sleep in the elderly, okay? All right, and then this brings about some other physical changes in the endocrine glands and the target organs themselves. The hypothalamus loses its ability to secrete hormones effectively. We also see some changes with some of those target organs. The pituitary gland tends to decrease in function. There's an overall shrinking with the brain that happens with aging. The thyroid gland becomes quite nodular, quite lumpy. The pineal gland, we said, calcifies physically, starts to calcify, and so the levels of melatonin decrease. We see general insulin resistance or insensitivity throughout most of the cells of the body, which leads to high glucose levels. In terms of reproductive function and reproductive organs, we see atrophy or shrinking of the ovaries and the testes. For the ovaries, it's about ages 40 to 50. For the testes is anything beyond age 70. The uterus also shrinks significantly with age as we lose reproductive function in women. And then finally, the thymus involutes or shrinks drastically beyond early adulthood or even puberty. So these are some of the physical changes that we see associated with the endocrine glands. And this is how we also kind of connect the endocrine function with general aging as well, because as a part of aging, we naturally see loss of function, decrease in size in most of the endocrine glands, the brain and the reproductive glands more so. Okay, so that is all for this week's mini lecture. I'm going to have you all sign up to groups and work on a group project this week. So be sure to be on the lookout for the sign up area in the content of the course. You've got to sign up by Wednesday, which gives you enough time to connect with your group members, to collaborate on a project. If you're not signed up by a group by Wednesday, I will automatically place you into a group. So make sure that you connect with the other people in the group. Depending on what hormone that group is responsible for, you're then going to reflect on the following questions regarding that hormone, and be sure to share your project in the Google Doc so that others can see your responses after you've posted. Also, have someone submit your project in the assignment area so that it can be graded there as well.